Welcome to the Inkscape interface. I'm Joe Pachkowski, and I'm going to help you learn the basics of the interface and how to get started in Inkscape. If you're new to Inkscape, this might look a little intimidating. Don't worry. I'll help you get through this. So, this is what you'll see or should see when you open up Inkscape for the first time. If you're on a Mac, you might see something different. Don't worry, everything is still there. It's just probably somewhere else, but you'll find it. Now, something that before I really get started, I've noticed that when some people have opened their Inkscape for the first time, their tool icons are so small they can't even make out what they are. And if that you have that problem, before I begin, I'd like to show you how to fix that, because it'll make everything else easier. So go up to Edit and come to Preferences, and if you look down the list, you will see Interface. You click on the interface and you'll see this, and here you can choose the size of the icons. So I would pick large if they're small, and you can play with these if you want. You'll notice there's also different languages. I haven't really tried these because it was by default in English, and I don't know if there'll be some unexpected surprises, but that's how to fix that. So the page I have my default settings on is because I'm in Europe. I have A4 and I'm using millimeters. If you want to change that, you can come up to Document Properties, and you can change your units to inches or pixels, centimeters, whatever you prefer, and you can change your document to US letter if you're in the United States and you like that size. You can also make a custom size. You can make it change the values here. You can make it anything you want. Notice that this is the printable page, which means you can draw outside this page, but if you want to print your document, the only thing that will print is what's inside this page. Otherwise, you can draw anywhere on the workspace. And to navigate the workspace, if you have and I recommend you have a mouse. If you don't have a mouse, and for example, if you're on the laptop, I can't help you. I don't know how it would work without a mouse. So the mouse your mouses have a scroll bar, and if you scroll the mouse bar, you can go up and down. If you hold down Shift, you'll go left to right, and if you hold down Control, you can zoom in and out. And it's really helpful to learn how to navigate your workspace. Makes life a lot easier. If you hit the number 5, it enlarges your printable page to the size of the screen, and that might be helpful. Okay, so I'm on a Windows computer, so if you're on a Mac and it looks different, you're probably used to that. But like most computer programs, they have a menu bar. So like all programs, under File you have New, Open, Save, Print, Export, the usual things. Under Edit you have the usual things, Copy, Paste. These can change according to program, but basically you're probably familiar with this if you're familiar with programs. One thing that's good in Inkscape is to duplicate, and like other programs, you'll notice next to the name of the names here of the commands, you'll see these shortcut keys, and these are good to know. Undo is Control Z. It's also here on this menu up here. But you can also use Control Z to do that, and redo is Shift Control Z. But these are also good to take note of when you're using anything. If you're using something, using the same command a lot, it's good to, saves a lot of time to use these shortcut keys. So these you should explore little by little as you get better into the program, and there are some that are essential, and we'll get to them little by little as we learn more about the program. So this bar here is intuitive, so it means it will change according to what's selected, and you will find this very helpful in the future. Take note of that. Another thing that's useful down here is your color palette. There's two ways to change the color properties. One is the palette, and the other is in a color properties panel, which I'll show you later. By clicking on a color, when you have a object selected, it will change that. If you hold down, if you click the X, you will give it no color, so it's transparent now. And if you hold down Shift when you click it, you're changing the stroke. So if I'm hold down Shift and click the green, I'm changing the stroke. The stroke is the color of the lines connecting the points that make up the shape. So click the palette to change the shape, and hold down Shift to change the stroke color. And the X is to give it no color, no stroke, no color. So the object is actually still there, but it's invisible because it has no shape, no fill, and no stroke. So that's something to keep in mind, how to use that. Below that is a status bar, and this is telling you what you've got selected. So this is saying I have a rectangle on layer 1. So if I had 2 rectangles on the page and I select them both, down here it will say 2 objects selected, and that can be helpful to if you want to be sure how many objects you have selected. So I'm going to press 5. So these are the tools you need to start creating graphics, and I've made this little chart here to tell you what the most essential ones are. So the selection tool, which is the first one up here, is the one you probably use the most. The selection tool, then there's the path edit tool. The difference between these is this will change the size. You can change the size, position, color, but this will change the structure of the shape because the shape is made up of points, and this you can edit the internal structure of the shape itself. The zoom tool will help you navigate in and out of the link. It's here. And the rectangle tool is a very nice tool. Helps you draw rectangles or squares, and you can make the corners round. These things, the rectangle tool, the circle tool, and the star and polygon tool, are special shapes. Means they have special properties that just a normal shape you draw yourself won't have. I'll get into that more later. You have 2 drawing tools. Freehand drawing, actually I have 3. Over here you have the freehand drawing tool, the Bezier drawing tool, and the calligraphic drawing tool. I don't ever use the calligraphic drawing tool, just personal preference of mine. I recommend you learn the Bezier drawing tool first because it gives you the best control over what you're drawing. The freehand drawing tool might seem easier in the beginning, but it isn't. It has less control, and it's sort of does what it wants. The next important tool is the text tool, which is here. I've grayed out all the tools that you don't really need to know in the beginning. And then another good tool is the fill bounding area. That will fill, if you have a closed area, you can sort of color it in with this shape. This is the gradient tool, which means you can make it go from shading from a dark to a light color, or one color to another color. And then the color picker tool will enable you to pick a color from anywhere in your drawing to change the color of a selected shape. These are the most important tools for beginners. But the essential ones you need to know are the ones I have the star next to. The selection tool, the path edit tool, the rectangle tool, and the draw bezier tool. When you know the rectangle tool, you'll probably manage the circle and the star and polygon tool. Now, whenever I'm using a graphic program, I always have one hand on the keyboard and one hand on the mouse, because the Control, Shift, and Alt buttons will enhance the functioning of most of the tools and save you a lot of time. I'll show you specific examples in a minute, but get used to having your one hand always on the keyboard and one hand always on the mouse, because it can help your workflow tremendously. Believe me, it can save you hours in the end. And of course, the Control-Z tool is something for undo that you will use quite a lot too. And that helps rather than always having to come up here and click something. So, and as you get used to these, you will find how really helpful these are. One thing I'd like to say about any tutorial you're following is, as the tutorial shows you something and demonstrates something, I recommend you hit pause, try it yourself, keep trying it till it works the same way. If you make a mistake, don't worry. There aren't really you're not going to break or damage anything by mistakes, and mistakes can actually teach you a lot. If you notice what happened when you made a mistake and why it happened, you can learn the functions a lot better. So the first thing I think the most important thing to understand is the selection tool. I'm going to draw a rectangle now, and I don't think you need to see me, so I'm going to shut off my own video here, picture. So I've drawn this rectangle, and when you have something selected, if you don't have something selected, you cannot change the color or shape or position. So it has to be selected. You can select it by either clicking right directly on it, or you can drag your mouse over it. If you have more than one object on your page and you want to select all of them, you can drag your mouse over it. But if you have one thing selected and you want to select another thing, if you just click on the next thing, the first thing becomes unselected. So if you want to select two things all at once, if I want to select all three things, I can just drag my mouse over it. And you notice down here it says 3 objects selected. But if I don't want to select this rectangle here in the middle, and I only select these, this doesn't help me because it's selecting all 3 things. But if I select this once and I hold down my shift key, I can select just those 2 and change the color and not affect that third thing. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is the shift key when selecting. That will help you to select additional things. It also unselects too. So if I want to unselect this, I hold down shift as I select it and it's unselected. When you've got something selected and you want to move it, if I drag it wherever I want and release the mouse button, that's where it will be. But if I hold down Control and I move it, it's going to constrain it on the X or Y axis, which means I can align it easier if I'm making want to keep it on the same line. So that's helpful. Now notice I select it once and I get these type of arrows here. This means I can resize it. So if I drag it, from the corner, I can change the size. If I take any one of these middle, I'm only changing the size from that end and not the other end. So now if I click it again, you'll notice on the second click these change to look like this, and this means it can rotate. So when you grab those and move them around, you can rotate your object. Now if I hold down Control, I can constrain it. I think it's to, is it 15 or 30 degrees it looks like. So anyway, I can get to 45 degrees pretty easy, or I can get to 90 degrees pretty easy. So holding down the Control is really helpful. Now if I go back to the resize and I want to resize it, and instead of hitting Control I hit Shift, then it's changing it from the center. If I hit Control and Shift, if I hit just Control, it's constraining the proportions. So it's without Control I can change the proportions. With Control it's keeping the same proportions. And Shift is changing from the center, and if you do both, then now Alt, the Alt key when changing the size constrains it to being double. That can be helpful too, but so it goes from 100%, 200%, 300% instead of just any random thing. So that's some of the basics of the selection tool. There's a lot more you'll discover, and by the way, you'll notice when you have the selection tool, let's make it, I'm going to make a shape like this. And let's give it a color. Okay. Now you'll notice these here. These, as I mentioned, this bar will change according to what tool you have selected. So let's look at these. Well, forget these for a moment, but this will rotate it 90 degrees counterclockwise. This will rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. This will flip it horizontally. This will flip it vertically. And these will change the stacking order. Now, as you're building a picture, you're adding shapes. Either you're drawing them with your Bezier tool, or you're using one of these tools to add shapes. Now imagine that you're working in paper and you have a table with a say a board on it, and imagine these are cut out pieces of paper. So as you add new pieces of paper, they are on top of all the previous pieces you've added. So So the more you add objects to your drawing, the newest one you draw will be on top of all the other previous ones. But sometimes you want to rearrange that order, and that's what these are for. So this will move it to the bottom of everything on the page, or everything on its present layer. So this is below everything else. But if I want to move it up one, I can go click here. So now it's moving, now it's on top. This will move it below that, and now it's on the bottom. This will move it directly to the top, directly to the bottom, up one, down one. So this is very helpful. This is telling you the size and position of your object. So that might be helpful to know. If you want a specific size, you can change it this way too. As I change the size, you can see what's happening. The width and the height. So those are the basic things of the selection tool. So have we covered everything, I think? Okay. The next tool that's important is the path edit tool. Now, the difference between these is when you're selecting these, you're able to change the position, the size, the color, but you can't, it's not changing the shapes themselves. To change the shapes themselves, I'm going to change this to a path. You have to come and use the path edit tool. Now, as I said before, a vector drawing is made up of points connected by lines, and they create a shape. The shape can have a fill, and to change that shape, you have to move those nodes around. This particular shape is connected by straight lines, and there's 4 points. If I double click on a line, it's automatically added a point. And because these were straight lines, it is a straight line that it added. Now, if I want this line to be curved, I click right on the line, and you'll notice the 2 nodes at either end of that line have become a little darker than the rest. And I can come up here and click make a curve segment, and now you'll notice 2 little handles have appeared. And if I move those handles, I can change the shape of that curve. Now, these are sharp or cusp. If I want to make them smooth, I could come up here and watch what happens. When I make it smooth, it means it will always be a smooth shape in relationship to the line next to it. So if I make it cusp, I can make it sharp. So you notice what all of these appear when this is selected, and all of these do something. So if I make this also a curved line by clicking on it, and I select just this node and I make it smooth, I'm able to change the handles so that this is a smoother, the curve is smoother. I think you see. And if I click here, symmetrical node, it means these 2 handles will always be the same length. So when you're changing one, it's automatically changing the other. And sometimes it's helpful when you're drawing something that you want symmetrical. to be able to use that. And if you want to make a straight line, you select right on the line and you select this, make segment a line instead of a curve, and then that changes that. This is because this was a smooth curve before, it will remain smooth, but it can't be symmetrical because this is a straight line and this is a curved line. So that's how to add, how you can begin to make the shapes into something you want it to be. If you're drawing a shape and you don't actually make it closed, I hit enter to stop it from drawing, or you can also right click it and that will also stop it. But these points didn't meet, and to join them up again, I select them both and then I can here join selected nodes, and this will break them apart again. But it's better to have closed curves. Otherwise you could have some unpredictable results in your drawing. Okay, one more thing I'd like to go over in this tutorial is grouping and ungrouping. Before we move on to other things. So if I select these, if I make a shape I like, which this isn't a shape I like, and I want to move these together all the time and select them all together, I can come up to here, I say Object and Group, which means it makes it one group, which when I select them, it will always select all of them. And that can help you when you're building a complex shape that keep things together and organized. So these are the basics of the selection and the path edit tool. You have to play with them and you have to practice them. And as you're playing with them, remember, as you're resizing them or moving them around, to use the Control and Shift and Alt keys, see what happens. Take note of what happens, remember what they do, and get a feel for them. Okay, as I said previously, the rectangle tool, the circle, and the star and polygon tools are kind of special shapes in that if I draw a square just on my own, I'm going to hold down Control as I draw to keep it, keep the lines. Without it, it will go anywhere. But if I hold down Control, it will constrain it so I can get a square. So now I have a square. It's not exactly square because this line, I'm going to move this line a little bit. Now this looks like a rectangle, and it is a rectangle, but it's just an ordinary rectangle. It's not a special shape. So if I come here and I draw a rectangle, it's a special shape, and the difference is that I can make the corners round. So as I mentioned before, you select it once, I can resize it. Twice I can rotate it, but if I double click it, something different happens. You'll notice this doesn't have anything. This has a square, this has a square. These will change the size, but this will change the corners. So I can make the corners round, completely round or partially round. Now one of the strange, because I drew this doesn't have that possibility. If I double click it, I just get to the node edit or the path edit tool, and then I can change the change the shape, but it will never make the corners round. If I wanted to make the corners round, I could, but it would be a lot more. It would take a lot more time. So that's one thing. Now another strange property of the rectangle tool is it remembers, because the last rectangle I had had round corners. When I draw a new one, it will automatically have the same round corners as I had last time. And if you don't want that and you want sharp corners, you'll notice that this toolbar has changed again with this tool selected. And this last tool will make the corner sharp. So you can restore it that way. Now if I start a new rectangle, they will be sharp because the last one was sharp. This is a property of Inkscape I don't really like. But that's what it does. And once you get used to it and you know what it's going to do, it's pretty easy to restore the round corners. Now I want to restore, if I wanted to restore this to be sharp corners, I have to go back and select the tool, and then it comes. So, and this is similar with the circle tool. Now, one thing before I go, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned it before, when I draw a rectangle, it will have 4 sides with 90-degree corners. But if I want a perfect square, I hold down Control as I'm drawing, and that constrains it to be a perfect square where the length of each side is the same. It's the same with the circle tool. With the circle tool, when you're drawing it, you can make any shape you want. Unless you hold down Control, it constrains it to be a perfect circle. So let's give that a color for a moment and hit the Select tool. So like the rectangle, you select it once, you get the resize, and if I hold down Control, it will keep its proportions. If I select it twice, I can rotate it. Of course, if I rotate this, you won't see anything change because it's always the same size. But you notice this X in the middle. This is the center of the shape. And if I take that X and I move it and then rotate it, it will not rotate around the center of it anymore. It'll rotate around wherever this is. So as you see, I'm rotating it now. It's going around that center X that I moved. Now if I hold down Control as I'm moving it, it's constraining it to, I think, 15-degree intervals. So that's also very helpful to know. It's holding down scroll. And this same principle is true of everything. Whatever object you have, even if it's a group of things, once you change that center point, that's what it'll rotate around. But like the rectangle, if I double click it, you'll notice I get 2 squares and a circle. The squares will again change the size from this direction and this direction. Let's hit undo and undo, and let's move this. So as I click down and move it, you see I'm able to make a pie. Or if I go the other direction, I'm making a kind of Pac-Man. Didn't do it now. Let me see. Yeah. So it makes like a Pac-Man type shape. And let's move the X back in the middle. So this is really one of the special properties of it being a circle. Now, if you don't like these special properties of the circle or the rectangle, you can convert them into ordinary shapes by coming up to the path and convert objects to path, which means now they don't have any properties of the special shapes. Now I can't make the corners round, but I can edit the nodes. Same with this. If I come up to path, to object to path, now it's just an ordinary shape that can be manipulated through the path edit tool. So that's good to know the difference between the special shape and the normal paths. The star and polygon tool we won't look at now, but like one thing to mention, when you try to draw a circle again after you've manipulated the shape, it will remember. And to restore it, you come back up here and see this little thing, make shape whole ellipse, and there you go. It will restore it to being a complete oval without any of those cut out things that happened. Okay, the Bezier tool will require a lesson all on its own. It's a little bit, it takes, probably learning to control the Bezier tool will take you the longest to learn. But it's worth every moment you can spend on it. So briefly, if I draw a line, click once, I get this red line that's stretching wherever I move my mouse. Wherever I put my mouse and I click once again, I get another line, I get another line, and I'm just clicking and then moving my mouse. I'm not holding the mouse down. And if I join them and it turns red, it means it's closing the curve. So it's a closed shape now. I don't have to use the Path Edit tool to join them. It will join them. So once it's joined, you can then come up here to the Path Edit tool and fix something if it's not the shape you wanted it to be. But if I click and hold down, I'm getting curve shapes. And this takes time to learn to control to get it to do what you want. It can be this takes time, and there's no doubt about it. They're automatically smooth curves. You can make them come up here and make them cusp if you need to. But as I said, takes a lesson. This will take a lesson all on its own. But you can play with this and start to get familiar with it. The freehand tool allows you to draw just freehand shapes, but you have no idea what it's going to do, where it's going to put the nodes. And, well, there is a smoothing function here. So if I say no smoothing and I draw a shape, and then I look at how many nodes, there are so many nodes. This would be impossible to edit, absolutely impossible. So if you're using this, please add some degree of smoothing so you don't get too many nodes to make it unmanageable. But you can play with it and find what's a suitable level. I like it at 30, but then I don't really use the tool that much anyway. But now it's not that difficult to edit again if you need to. But I don't actually like this tool that much because I like the control of the Bezier tool. And we'll look more at that. But practice these tools a little bit, especially the selection tool. Learn how to change the order so you can move something to the top of the order, move something to the back, change its color, change its position. Practice when you have a shape and you click on a color to change the color. You can also hold down Shift to change the stroke. There's a lot more to learn, but if you can get familiar with these, everything else after that will be easier. So practice that. Good luck, and we'll continue more in another lesson. So good luck, and I'll see you again. Bye.